Forget the whisper of Don Corleone and the glamour of Hollywood myths. The truth is much more primitive and, therefore, more interesting. The history of the American Mafia's emergence at the turn of the 19th and 20th centuries is not a chronicle of warriors with a code of honor. It's an accounting ledger written in blood on the dusty streets of the Lower East Side. We are not interested in who pulled the trigger. We are interested in who paid for the bullets and what profit the shot brought. We delve into a world where fear was the most liquid commodity and violence was the most effective management tool. The central question of our investigation is, how did criminal groups, consisting of illiterate Sicilian peasants, manage to build a shadow economy in a foreign country without knowledge of its laws or language that operated with corporate efficiency? What financial instruments did they invent? How did they manage risks? And how did they keep records in their black box treasury? To answer this question, we will conduct an autopsy of this criminal machine by examining its 5 key nodes, 5 anchor stories. We will trace the entire evolution of their financial thought. We'll start with the crudest instrument, the Black Hand Extortion, which operated like a viral and brutal franchise. Then we will see how chaos turned into a system through the elegant mechanism of a food monopoly. Next, we will analyze how the Mafia created its own People's Bank, an underground lottery that siphoned millions of cents daily from poor neighborhoods. After that, we will study their attempt to seize control over the very source of wealth, the printing press for counterfeit money. And finally, we will analyze the pinnacle of their early power, labor union racketeering, which allowed them to levy tribute not on individual merchants, but on entire sectors of New York's industry. 5 stories, 5 stages of building a shadow empire. But none of these schemes would have worked if there hadn't been a perfect breeding ground for them. New York City in the early 20th century was not just a city. It was a bubbling cauldron where poverty, ambition, and complete indifference from the authorities were mixed. Millions of immigrants from southern Italy, fleeing starvation, ended up in ghettos where American laws and concepts did not apply. They did not trust the police, whom they considered an instrument of a foreign and hostile state. This power vacuum was filled by the Mafia, which offered its own alternative system of justice and order. Corruption was pervasive. The Tammany Hall political machine sold positions and protection from prosecution. Every police officer, every judge had their price. In this ecosystem, organized crime was not a disease, but a natural and even necessary organ that regulated the lives of those rejected by official society. It was on this decaying soil that the financial empires we will be studying grew. Before there were structures, hierarchies, and bosses, there was chaos. And this chaos had a name, La Mano Nera, the Black Hand. It was not an organization like the Cosa Nostra. It was an idea, a viral business model available to anyone. Fear was its product, and a threatening letter was its commercial offer. It would appear under the door of a grocery store or in an opera singer's dressing room, bringing with it not just a demand for money, but a feeling of absolute helplessness. After all, the victim, usually an immigrant, understood that going to the American police was pointless and deadly dangerous. It was considered a betrayal. Thus, criminals turned the social isolation of an entire community into their main asset. We now turn to a story that shows how this primitive mechanism worked even against the richest and most famous. November 1908, New York. A letter is delivered to the dressing room of the world's greatest tenor, Enrico Caruso, at the Metropolitan Opera. Inside is a demand scrawled in broken Italian to pay $2,000, over $60,000 today, and a crude drawing of a black hand. The threat was clear. Refusal would cost him his health and possibly his divine voice. Caruso, a man of the world who earned fabulous sums of money, found himself in the same trap as a poor shopkeeper from Little Italy. In a panic, he pays. But this only whetted the extortionist's appetite. The next letter demands $15,000. This time, Caruso, overcoming his fear, turns to the only man the Italians trusted, Lieutenant Joseph Petrosino, head of the New York Police Department's Italian Squad. Petrosino devises a plan. He gives Caruso an envelope with marked bills and sends him to a meeting at an inconspicuous shop in Brooklyn. At the moment of the money transfer, the police arrest the extortionists. They turned out to be rank-and-file members of the Morello gang who decided to make some money on the side. Now let's dissect the financial logic of this scheme. The Black Hand is a criminal venture project with almost infinite profitability. The startup investment is a sheet of paper and ink. The potential profit is thousands of dollars. It was an open franchise. Anyone could use the well-known Mano Nera brand, and every new crime committed under this name enhanced the reputation of all other franchisees. The accounting was done in one's head or on scraps of cigar boxes. Primitive, but completely inaccessible to the police. The main asset was not strength, but information. Knowing which of the neighbors had sold a house, received an inheritance, or was simply doing well in business. It was the ugliest form of a social network, where one person's success became a reason for a threat from another. This chaotic and brutal environment was also a kind of business incubator. Those who showed the greatest organizational skills in this bloody trade soon moved on to the next, more systemic level. But the system was not omnipotent. It had an enemy, and the enemy was smart, determined, and most importantly, one of their own. Detective Joseph Petrosino, an immigrant from Salerno, was a real nightmare for the Mafia and the Black Hand. He understood their mentality, spoke their dialects, and despised omertà, the code of silence that paralyzed the justice system. Heading the Italian Squad, he turned it into the first organized crime-fighting unit in the United States. Petrosino was an innovator. He created a huge card file with photographs and fingerprints of thousands of Italian criminals, tracking their movements between the US and Italy. He didn't wait for a crime to happen. He acted proactively, planting agents and dismantling gangs before they could gain strength. For thousands of honest immigrants, he was the only symbol of hope. For criminals, he was a mortal threat. That is why in March 1909, during a trip to Palermo to gather information, he was tracked down and assassinated. His death was a signal to the Mafia. The most dangerous enemy was eliminated. The path was clear. The murder of Joseph Petrosino in 1909 had a resounding effect. The Mafia didn't just eliminate an enemy, it made a statement. Now the game would be played for high stakes. Leaders of the new generation of the criminal world, like Piero Terranova, understood that the chaotic terror of the Black Hand was a dead end. It attracted too much attention and provided too unstable an income. Real power and real money lay not in intimidating individuals, but in controlling the systems on which everyone depended. And the most important system was the food distribution system. Why extort $20 from a shopkeeper when you can force him, and hundreds like him, to pay 2 cents more for every crate of vegetables? The question was no longer how to take, but how to tax life itself. Imagine the bustling Bronx terminal market in the 1920s. It is the heart through which food flows into the city. And this heart has its own cardiologist, Ciro, the Artichoke King Terranova. On paper, he is a respectable businessman, owner of an import-export company. In reality, he built a flawless, vertically integrated monopoly. His agents in California forced farmers to sell their artichoke crops only to his firms. In New York, no wholesaler could buy this product until it was processed by Terranova's company. The price would then magically soar by 30–40%. If an independent merchant tried to bring in artichokes from another state, his truck would get into an accident, his warehouse would burn down, and he himself would be advised to get out of the business. Terranova rarely resorted to violence himself. He didn't have to. The system worked like clockwork, and his reputation was the best guarantee of obedience. Let's dissect the mechanism. This isn't just racketeering, it's a classic example of seizing a bottleneck in the supply chain. Terranova understood that he didn't need to control thousands of farmers and thousands of stores. He needed to control a single node, the wholesale market through which all the goods passed. In essence, he created a private, criminal customs agency. Any import of artichokes into his domain was subject to a tariff that went straight into his black box treasury. The accounting here reaches a new level. It's no longer scraps of paper, but a full-fledged record of supplies, price control, and cash flow management through legal front companies. Such income was not only stable and predictable, but also partially laundered, as it came from real commercial activity. This was a huge step forward. The Mafia was no longer just a parasite. It began to integrate itself into the very fabric of the legal economy. But let's pause for a moment and ask a question. Control over the artichoke market. Doesn't that sound petty? Can you really build a criminal empire on that? Perhaps this story, hyped by the newspapers, was just a facade, a smokescreen hiding darker dealings. And what were the limits of this power? You could intimidate a small shopkeeper, but what happened when their interests clashed with real corporate power, for example, with the emerging supermarket chains? This model was effective within a closed ethnic community, but was it scalable? By transforming from a phantom gangster into a public artichoke king, didn't a mafia boss become a more vulnerable target for ambitious prosecutors and a new breed of politicians, like future Mayor LaGuardia, who would declare war specifically on Terranova? Perhaps this step towards legitimization was not an evolution, but the first step into a trap. The questions we asked were not hypothetical. The mafia leaders themselves understood the vulnerability of a business built on controlling physical goods. Such a business left a trail. It could be tracked and attacked, which is exactly what Mayor LaGuardia did in the 1930s when he symbolically destroyed Terranova's artichokes on the city streets. A different source of income was needed. The ideal criminal business had to be invisible, decentralized, and operate on pure cash. And most importantly, customers had to come willingly. The solution was found not in the realm of fear, but in the realm of hope. The Mafia didn't invent gambling, but it turned the underground lottery, known as policy, or the numbers game, into an incredibly effective financial pump that transferred millions daily from the pockets of the poor into its black box treasury. It was a daily ritual woven into the very fabric of life in immigrant neighborhoods. A housewife interpreting her dream would bet 5 cents on the dreamed number. A dock worker would bet a nickel on his union card number. Bets were taken everywhere, at the barbershop, the cigar store, the confectionery. A runner would write the number on a thin slip of paper, tear it in half, and give one part to the customer as a receipt. The genius of the system was its apparent fairness. The winning 3-digit number was not chosen by the Mafia. It was taken from publicly available sources that were impossible to forge. Most often, the last 3 digits of the daily U.S. Treasury balance report, which were printed in all the evening newspapers. In the evening, the whole neighborhood would study the newspapers, and the next morning, the runner would promptly pay out the winnings. This reliability created boundless trust in the system. Now let's dissect the mathematical core of this machine. The probability of guessing a number from 000 to 999 is 1 in 1,000. But the bank, the criminal organization that controlled the territory, paid out winnings at a rate of 600 to 1, and sometimes even 500 to 1. This 40–50% difference was not just profit, but the system's mathematically guaranteed income. It was the perfect tax on hope. From an accounting perspective, this was a breakthrough. The organization had to create a complex accounting system to process tens of thousands of daily bets, to track cash flows from hundreds of runners, and to detect fraud within its own ranks. A clear analogy is not just a lottery, but a private banking system for the poor. It operated like a vast network for collecting micro-deposits, bets, turning them into colossal liquid capital. It was this flow of pure, anonymous cash that fueled the Mafia's most important operations, bribing judges and politicians, financing wars with competitors, and investing in new, more expensive projects. Control over the unions gave the Mafia power and a stable income. It seemed the pinnacle had been reached. They had learned to redistribute existing money in the economy in their favor. But for the most ambitious minds like Giuseppe Morello, this was not enough. All their income, from racketeering to lotteries, depended on external sources. The next step required absolute financial independence. It was the most arrogant and dangerous idea of all. Why take money from others when you can create it yourself? Why be a parasite on the body of the economy when you can become its counterfeit heart, pumping fake blood through its veins? This was playing with fire at the highest level, a direct challenge to the state's monopoly, a crime that the federal authorities, unlike the corrupt local police, never forgave. In 1909, agents of the U.S. Secret Service, the agency created to combat counterfeiters, noticed a disturbing trend. Nearly perfect counterfeit $2 and $5 bills began to surface throughout New York and beyond. The investigation, like a thread, led from street vendors to wholesalers and eventually to the import empire of Ignazio the Wolf Lupo. But he was just the distributor. The factory was located on a quiet farm in Highland, a few hours' drive from the city. There, in the basement, under the personal supervision of Giuseppe, the clutch hand, Morello, worked a skilled engraver named Antonio Secala, brought over specially from Sicily. The operation was set up on an industrial scale. Freshly printed money was transported to New York, where, through a network of grocery stores and taverns, Lupo slowly and carefully introduced it into circulation, mostly as change. But in November 1909, federal agents struck, arresting the entire top brass of the gang right on the farm, along with printing plates and fresh stacks of money. What was the economic sense of this scheme? This was not just an attempt to print pocket money, it was a strategic tool for financing growth. The counterfeit money was used as seed capital for new criminal enterprises and as a fund for waging wars with competitors. This allowed them to expand the empire without risking clean money obtained from other rackets. In essence, Morello and Lupo created their own private central bank that could carry out unlimited issuance for the needs of their shadow economy. The analogy here is an illegal stock offering. It allowed them to create resources from nothing. However, the risk was colossal. Unlike murder or racketeering, which could be gotten away with thanks to corruption, counterfeiting was an attack on the state itself. The harsh sentence, 25 and 30 years of hard labor for Morello and Lupo, became a lesson for the next generation of mobsters. You don't play these games with the federal government. The flow of cash from the underground lottery gave the Mafia an unprecedented resource, liquid capital. But money for money's sake was not an end in itself. Capital must work. It must buy power. The new generation of leaders like Lucky Luciano and his partners Meyer Lansky, Lepka Buchalter, and Gura Shapiro understood this better than anyone. They surveyed the economic landscape of New York and saw a new colossal force: labor unions. In the garment industry, in trucking, in transportation, everywhere workers were organizing, demanding better conditions. These unions had huge membership funds and, more importantly, they had a button that could shut down an entire industry: a strike. Criminal thinking made a brilliant and cynical leap. Why fight this force when you can lead it? Imagine Manhattan's garment district in the late 1920s and early 1930s. Thousands of small factories compete with each other under the harshest conditions. The main headache for any owner is labor unrest and strikes, which can lead to ruin. And then an inconspicuous man comes to his office and makes an offer. This man is from Lepka Buchalter. The offer is simple. The owner pays Buchalter's association a certain amount per year. In return, he gets complete industrial peace. Any attempts by workers to organize a strike would be brutally suppressed. Wage levels would be fixed at a level favorable to the owner. How did it work? Buchalter and his gang would first seize control of local union cells using violence and blackmail to promote their people to leadership positions. After that, the union transformed from a protector of workers into their overseer. For those who disagreed, there were other arguments: acid in the face, broken legs, and mysterious disappearances. The enforcer of this work was the infamous Murder Inc. Let's dissect this economic model. This is the pinnacle of criminal entrepreneurship. The Mafia was no longer just a racketeer. It became a shadow arbiter, an indispensable intermediary between labor and capital. It sold a unique product that no one else could offer: guaranteed stability. The black box treasury here was replenished from three sources. The first was direct payments from factory owners for protection from their own workers. The second was the embezzlement of money directly from the union's treasury and pension funds. The third was bribes from businesses for signing favorable collective agreements that infringed on workers' rights. A clear analogy is a private, criminal ministry of labor. It issued licenses, settled disputes, and set the rules of the game for entire sectors of the economy. For the first time, the Mafia gained direct control over legal businesses, deeply integrating itself into their structure. This was no longer a parasitic activity, but a form of shadow governance that laid the foundation for their power for decades to come. So, we have come all the way, from a dirty, threatening letter to a private printing press. Now, looking back, we see not just a set of criminal schemes, but a whole, evolving organism. Our 5 anchor stories are the 5 vital organs of this system. The Black Hand extortion was its fangs and claws, a primitive weapon for the initial accumulation of capital. The food monopoly was its stomach, which digested legal business to extract a stable profit. The underground lottery was its circulatory system, providing a continuous flow of liquid cash. Union racketeering became its brain and nervous system, allowing it to control entire sectors of the economy. And counterfeiting was its heart, a dangerous and desperate attempt to pump its own blood to become fully autonomous. Each of these systems solved its own problem, together creating an astonishingly resilient shadow empire. And now we can give a final answer to our main question. The accounting of the early Mafia's black box treasury was not a system of record-keeping, but a system of control. They didn't write down numbers, they seized processes. Their genius lay in their ability to find and monetize vulnerabilities. The immigrant's vulnerability to fear, the vulnerability of a supply chain at its narrowest point, the vulnerability of the poor man clinging to hope, the vulnerability of the capitalist to labor revolt, and finally, the vulnerability of the monetary system itself. They created a criminal operating system that proved so effective that its basic principles are still at work today. The methods have changed, but the logic remains the same. The principle of the Black Hand lives on in every ransomware attack. The logic of the Artichoke King is found in the drug cartel's control over transit corridors. The mathematics of the underground lottery is in the billion-dollar turnover of illegal online casinos. This primitive accounting, born in poverty and violence 100 years ago, turned out to be one of the most durable and dark inventions of the